Hello and welcome back to Behind the Paddle Podcast with me, Paulson Victoria. So this is part two of, I don't know what exactly I'm going to call it yet, but this is part two of talking about rigging and rope and all things wonderful. And I am here with Miss Fay Morgan, and we're going to continue talking about rope. We've talked so much in part one, and I very much encourage you to go back and give part one a listen if you haven't already listened to it. If you have, then thank you for listening and go listen again. Why not? And yeah, so now we're going to talk about the descent into the emotional terrain of rope bondage. Because for so many people, the rope is not just physical, it's psychological, just like many, many more different aspects of BDSM. It invokes vulnerability, catharsis, and even transformation. And in the wrong hands, it can replicate harm instead of healing. That sensation of dropping in, of something shifting emotionally, chemically, spiritually, while in bondage. Miss Fay Morgan, can you speak to that? What does emotional surrender look like in rope, and what's your experience of witnessing or holding that as a top?
Well, very good question. Thank you for having me back on Behind the Paddle here as not only a portable thesaurus, but your friendly neighborhood rigger. So emotional surrender can look so many ways in rope. I I often think of it as sort of someone melting. You know, you might notice just they're softer, there's less body tension. Perhaps they start to lean back into you. They react different to your touch, perhaps move gently away from it, perhaps lean into it. And in terms of witnessing and holding that, that is something that can depend on what you've negotiated. You know, if you've negotiated for a scene of emotional cruelty or abandonment, perhaps you're witnessing it and intentionally not providing comfort. That would be more of an unusual and edge case, but just to make the point that it can vary. But as I mentioned in part one, for me, that emotional surrender, being trusted with it, being trusted with not only witnessing someone in their vulnerability, but pushing them into greater vulnerability is really my truest motivator and kink.
So, there's a term many of us use in the kink world, which is subspace. That altered state where time shifts and you float somewhere between pleasure, trust, and dissociation. We did talk about this in previous episodes of the neurochemistry of the lovely brain. So if you haven't listened to those episodes, go listen. It's very, very interesting. All the lovely chemicals. So we've got like cortisol, serotonin, so many more, so many more. For some, rope is one of the fastest ways to get there. What are the signs that someone is entering subspace during a rope scene? And how do you, as the person tying, respond when you notice that happening?
So again, I mentioned in part one that witnessing someone enter subspace through rope, and the first time I caused someone to enter subspace through rope were really formative moments for me as a kinkster and as a rigger. And you know, some rope bottoms never experience subspace. Some people actually talk about rope space as something distinct from subspace. That perhaps they're not submitting or don't see it as a DS interaction, but again, it is that altered state. And rope space is a term that can also be used as a top. So that state of flow and extreme focus and nothing existing outside of a rope. And the signs that someone is entering subspace, they might be, if they've had their eyes open, maybe their eyes drift closed. Perhaps they're more relaxed. Perhaps their breathing changes. And also, they might be slower to respond to you verbally, you know, if you ask a question. And so, what I usually do when I'm negotiating is I ask someone if they have a tendency to struggle more with verbal communication in subspace. And even if they say they don't, I agree tactile symbols. So check-in. So for me, I squeeze someone's hand, and if they squeeze back, then that's, I'm still here, I'm still consenting. If they don't squeeze back, I will stop and more thoroughly verbally check in until I get some words out of them and see if they're doing all right. The vast majority of time, they've just forgotten the signal and why I'm squeezing their hand. But for me, that's a great reassurance. And it means that if we're really enjoying that beyond verbal space, I don't necessarily need to break the moment, but I can check in. Sometimes when I'm doing something to intensify something, you know, give their hand a squeeze and squeeze back. Okay, right, you can take that and give a little bit more. How do I respond when I notice that happening? Well, part of the awareness is, you know, subspace as an altered state can mean that you have less body awareness. So that affects my risk profile a bit. You know, I wouldn't try a more risky tie that I don't know someone has experience of, or that I know someone does not have experience of, if I can see that they're high off their head in subspace. But generally, I'd feel good about it. I get a vicarious high, and I'd be glad.
Yeah. And I feel like something which I should just also note is that if you don't go into subspace, whether you're a top, dom, or tying, being tied, don't worry if you don't go into any spaces. Like, for some people, it can be really, really hard, I've found, to be in spaces, and especially if you're always thinking about it and you're putting pressure on yourself. Yeah, don't think about it too much, I feel, when it comes to spaces. Just enjoy the moment that you're in. And yeah, don't put too much pressure on yourself thinking, oh, I should be in this headspace, or I really want to feel what other people feel in spaces.
There's no surer way to prevent yourself from enjoying the moment than stressing about not feeling something you should be feeling.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like it's a delicate balance because on one hand, subspace can be a gift, but on the other, it creates real vulnerability. And with vulnerability comes responsibility, a heck of a lot of responsibility. So let's talk about that. In a world where anyone can post rope photos online, teach a beginner class, or call themselves a rigger, because I have found that in the kink community.
Man.
Where they've done one thing in rope or seen something and they've went, yes, I am now a rigger.
This is a great way to acquire a steady stream of young women new to the scene.
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, I feel like they're the red flags where play partners or tops pick young, I want to say vulnerable, especially new people in the kink community. And when you are new in the community as well, you do sometimes want friends. You do want to meet people, but you can ignore the red flags of other people as well, and that can be really, really dangerous. Absolutely.
You haven't really calibrated your red flag detector, you know? You're in this brave new world where people are doing all sorts of wild things that wouldn't be acceptable in normal society. And so you don't know which behaviors you wouldn't tolerate in vanilla interactions. You should tolerate, or perhaps you put pressure on yourself to accept things out of an eagerness to feel accepted and to make friends.
Absolutely. And I feel like once we've made mistakes or things have happened to us, then we build boundaries.
Yeah.
I've found that does happen with people who have had something traumatic happen.
Yeah.
And
just to step off of that into the, you know, where anyone can call themselves a rigger an ethical practice, you know, my first experience of bottoming in rope, you know, it wasn't any of the you know, people I've mentioned learning from. It was someone I didn't really have further interactions with this, but I was at Torture Garden. I think it was the first or maybe the second Torture Garden I'd ever been to. I was very new to the kink scene, and I saw someone doing suspensions, and, you know, I didn't know him from Adam. He didn't know me. And I sort of went up and was like, oh, I saw you tying someone. Like, would you possibly tie me? Would you suspend me? And he said, yeah, all right. And I'd been drinking, and, I answered honestly when he asked me if I had, but, it was a noisy environment. We couldn't have proper negotiation. He couldn't check in with me about injury and so on. And he suspended me, and I was fine, and he didn't touch me in a way I was uncomfortable with. And because I was both like lucky and sporty, I didn't get any injuries. But I look back and I go, there was so much scope for that to go really wrong. And as a rigger, I would never tie, a young drunk woman who came up to me and went, "Hey, you rig, will you put rope on me and suspend me?" I cringe at my past self, but I really side-eye that rigger.
No, I certainly would too, to be fair. Just, there's so many people sadly out there who don't do rigging and rope justice. Instead, they can mislead people, especially when it comes to educating other people. And I've seen it before, not just with rope, but I personally went to a mistress about medical play, and this is a well-known mistress. And I asked, I went for needle play.
Were you bottoming, or were you seeking education as a top?
So I was bottoming in the scene, but I was learning as if I was the top, if that makes any sense.
Like learning to take it with a view to dishing it out.
Yeah, I absolutely believe in, like, what you inflict on the sub, you need to inflict on yourself.
Yeah.
to an extent. To also see how it feels, and that obviously would help with if you're going hard on a sub or if you're going lightly on the sub. And I think is very, very useful, and it puts more trust, for me at least, with the dominant, that they know more of what they're doing. But yeah, I went to a mistress, very well-known mistress here in Scotland, to learn more about needles. We got talking about saline injections. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Sure. Like, you do it on me. So I had saline injected into my hand, into my arm. And then this mistress, who is very known on the scene and has been here for many years and is even in porn videos and such, she then proceeds to tell me how saline is completely safe. And it's fine if it goes into the bloodstream and stuff. And I was like, what? Wait, I don't really think it is that safe. And so that kind of taught me, no matter how educated somebody can also be, there can still be red flags in certain people and in certain ethics that people do speak upon, and how they educate other people. So yeah, always look up, I would suggest, even after you've been taught by somebody as well. Especially if you are new to, whether it's the industry or whether it's the lifestyle itself, or whether you're just curious. Yeah, in a world where anybody can do anything and say they are anything, you really need to take a look and double check everything and put boundaries up as well. That is such a very important thing, which sometimes those boundaries don't come in until after things have happened. But
and I would also say, particularly when you're talking to a professional, their response to that will tell you volumes. If you ask a polite and relevant question, the answer you would hopefully get is, yep, fair enough. Here, this is the experience I have with this, and, this is how many years I've been doing it. These are practices I do, these are ones I don't. If someone, whether they are a professional or a lifestyler, reacts in a defensive or an angry way at you saying, hi, I'm interested in this practice, I've heard it can be dangerous, could you just tell me a little bit about your experience? If they react crossly to that, then that's not a great sign.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does consent look like in rope? Not just the yes or no, but the nuance.
Yeah, so this is a very good question, not one with simple answer. So I can say, so I'll tell you about some things I do to try and kind of stay on the right side of that dance. So it starts with negotiation. You know, I have a thorough negotiation before a scene, both talking about practical things, you know, what areas of your body can I tie? What areas of your body do you not want rope on? Are there any parts of your body that you do not want me to touch? But I also talk about whether in-scene negotiation is allowed. So, you know, if we're in the middle of a scene and I realize I really want to bite someone's toe, can I ask them, can I bite your toe? Just take a completely random example of something I definitely didn't do in a session earlier this week. To, you know, so someone, as we spoke before, it interacts with subspace. You know, someone might say, actually, subspace me will say yes to anything. You can't really trust, you know, that the consent I give in that altered state is a representative of like my true desires, in which case I'll go, okay, I know not to push anything in scene or ask for anything new in scene that wasn't explicitly covered in negotiation. As I mentioned in the previous answer, I also check about whether someone tends to go nonverbal, and I ask them for signs to look out for, to tell them for when they're struggling. You know, some people might crimp their toes or start to sort of flex their fingers a lot when they're struggling either emotionally or physically. I talk about that practical stuff, but I also talk about the energy and the vibe. You know, I talk about the level of body contact from me that they're comfortable with. When I tie, I tend to be quite close in with someone. I will sometimes, you know, put a foot on them to hold a limb in place. I might sit on them, you know, put my weight on them. I might use impact more to shock and add contrast rather than to give pain, but I'll negotiate that beforehand. And then I also talk about whether there is a sadomasochistic element to this for them. So, you know, do I have their consent to intentionally cause them pain beyond the sort of base pain of the rope, to intentionally do things in a more painful way? Is it a DS dynamic? And then also, how sexual is it? So both in terms of sexual contact, but also in terms of sexual energy. I have a story here from my personal life, which is someone who was a friend with sexual and kink benefits of mine, who then got into a monogamous relationship, but, you know, with the consent of their partner, wanted to be tied by me. And I felt a little unsure about this because, you know, she told me that she was sexually monogamous. And I said, well, you know, I can promise not to touch you in any overtly sexual ways, but I'm attracted to you. That has been our energy in the past. I cannot promise that I will not be bringing sexual energy to this or looking at you in a sexually hungry way. And I articulated that, and she said, no, that is fine. Like, that is within what my partner and I have agreed. That is within parameters. But that is something that's important to check. And my general rule of thumb, or like guiding principle, is it's always better to do less and leave someone wanting more or feeling, oh, I could have gone a bit further, or I really wish you kissed me. So much better to leave them wanting more than to risk traumatizing someone or to risk violating their consent. I also find it's important to negotiate aftercare before the scene, and also to be open to conversations afterwards. You know, someone might say, when you say, what aftercare do you need? And they might say, could you drop me a message tomorrow, just see if I'm doing all right, because it'll be an intense scene and I might need a little bit of, you know, just check in, touch base then. And then also to be open to feedback that people get. You know, if you have feedback from bottom, whether it's about a technical aspect of the tie or whether it's about your communication during the scene, then listen to what they say and take it into account and reevaluate your practice based on that.
So there's a term I've heard used by some rope practitioners, and in previous episodes that will be released, I actually had the lovely pleasure of talking to. So I had the pleasure of having Channel 4's Virgin Island, Celeste Hirschman and Dr. Daniel Harrell on recently, talking about somatica and talking about the lovely world of somatica and how it does entwine with BDSM. So Please go listen to that episode. It is very, very interesting, and it is such a lovely conversation that we, all three of us, have about how consent, whether that be touch, verbal, it all is entwined with BDSM and even vanilla, where you're looking to see if somebody's breathing correctly, if there's a change in a change in pace, if there's just a difference. It very much is being connected to one another. Enthusiastic somatic consent, meaning not just verbal consent, but a body based consent that shows up in muscle tension, breathing, micro movements, everything. It's about attunement and about checking in without words. So, how do you stay attuned to somebody's body when you're tying them? What does that entail listening look like for you?
I love those moments where you learn a new phrase that describes a phenomenon that you're very familiar with, and it's not a phrase I've come across before. I very much look forward to listening to that episode. But yeah, that is a core part, not just of my tying, but of my doming overall, is, reading a person, reacting to the person. So how do I stay attuned to someone's body? So for me, a lot of it is instinctive. I'm keenly observing, and, if someone were to say, how did you know that doing X was something they liked, and so you're going to do some more, I could kind of think back and go, okay, yeah, no, the sort of foot was doing a happy wiggle, and then the breathing was really relaxed. But in the moment, it's just a knowing. But the caveat to that is sometimes our instincts can take us astray. So you can refine your instincts more by knowing the person, but you can't make assumptions, especially if it's your first time playing with someone. So I feel more safe relying on enthusiastic somatic consent with people who are people I have played with before, that I have an established dynamic with, and that I feel we have a good line of communication both in and outside kink scenes, where I feel that hopefully I will read them right. If I read them wrong, they will tell me in the moment, and if not, and I do inadvertently cross a boundary, that is something that we can communicate and work through together. So that said, if I see a reaction, I think it might mean that they like that thing, but it also might mean that they're feeling a bit tense or they're uncomfortable with that. I will ask, I'll often go, is that a good noise or a bad noise? Because you don't know when you don't know someone, and someone's noise of happy pain or arousal might sound like an unhappy noise if you don't know them yet. And so I'll ask, and I'll sort of calibrate my awareness, like learn their particular language, and check if my instinct is correct, which then makes it more accurate in future. And I sort of think of it as having a menu of different things to try, because different people will relax into a scene and, potentially reach subspace through different treatments. With some people being quite aggressive in my tying and, quite quick, quite rough, will have them swooning. And with some people, they're fairly resistant to that, but actually going slow, being very intent and almost tender, being tender and very attentive will actually leave them feeling a lot more emotionally vulnerable and sort of melty in the scene. So I have a sort of a mental smorgasbord of different things to try, and I'll try something and I'll go, okay, they're not really reacting very much to that. I'll try something else. Well, what about, that got a reaction. Oh, well, sometimes, a sprinkle of cayenne pepper goes really well with this dish. I'll add that.
I mean, cayenne pepper in general in a scene is
No, I don't know, you wouldn't really have cayenne pepper in a smorgasbord, but you know what I mean. You're like, this is a great wine cheese pairing, and I see you like the brie. I don't know anything about wine. I don't know why I picked this metaphor.
I do not know anything about wine.
But I mean, if I can see that someone is, that when I'm bringing aggressive energy, they're becoming a bit more tense and locked off to me. But when I bring tender energy, they are becoming a little more emotionally vulnerable, then I might go, okay, well, I think this might work well with that, and proceed in the scene based on the reactions I'm getting from them.
So let's now talk about trauma, because anything in BDSM, whether it be something as you think might be small, where somebody has got you blindfolded and they trace their fingers up your arm, that could absolutely trigger you, or something as potentially big as being suspended. That could trigger you as well, absolutely. So, rope can stir up trauma even when you least expect it. And that's not always a failure of consent. It's just a part of how the memory lives in the body. It happens. It does. And now you've got to help repair that in a way. And my question to you is, how do you hold space when someone has a trauma response mid scene, or when something goes wrong in a scene for any reason? And what would you say to newer tops who might panic or freeze when that happens?
That's a very good question. And I appreciated the nuance there of you saying that it's not necessarily a failure of consent or a failure of the bottom to thoroughly negotiate. Sometimes we can have triggers that we're not aware of. And it can be very difficult to experience this as a top. This is something I have experienced, and it feels very intense and emotionally distressing to you at the moment, in that moment. But what you need to do is center the needs of the person who is having that response. So don't make it about you. Don't go into a big, oh, I thought we were okay. You're okay with me? Do you think I'm a bad person? Like, that can come later. For now, it is about helping that person to safely navigate through. You can have your own reaction later with your own support system. So center them for now. If they can still verbally communicate, work out if they want to stop the scene, or if they'd like to continue with something different direction. If you're doing a rougher scene and they were like, actually, it would feel really jarring, and if we completely stopped, but we do a really sort of tender scene where you're just wrapping me in rope, that might feel comforting. We're getting the mushy ones. So work out if they want to stop scene or change direction. If they can't communicate that well to you, err on the side of stopping things. And thank them for communicating with you. I always say that when someone communicates something, whether it's that wrap is a bit high or a bit tight, or I'm uncomfortable, or, something, I'm having a trauma response, I say, thank you for communicating that with me. And, once the rope is off, establish what they need to regulate themselves. If they want you around or don't want you around, try not to take it personally. It could be that they're having a post-traumatic response and their logical brain knows that you're not the person who has caused them that trauma, but emotionally they just can't look at you or have you touch them right now. So, work out. And again, it's about what they need, not about what you need at that moment. And make it clear to them that you're not disappointed. It's not a failure. You are grateful to them for communicating that for you. We're complex, messy nerve spaghetti, doing strange things, and unexpected stuff happens sometimes. And that's just being a human who is tying humans and not robots. And then afterwards, you can, seek your own support, ideally with people besides them, because if they're processing a trauma response, you then dumping your peripheral trauma to having them, just your trauma from having seen them have a trauma response they're not the appropriate person to put that work on. So seek support from your support system, particularly experienced tops who've navigated that before. And if a person is ready and willing to, you can have a conversation with them about, what happened, what was it you did? Was there a failure of, was a misreading or a communication or consent failure on your part, or was it something unexpected? If you two have plans to play again in future, what are things you could do to avoid triggering that, and ways that you could more skillfully navigate traumas arising together as a team?
So you hear that? Communication. That's what all that is. And the idea that rupture can still be repairable is so critical.
Mm-hmm.
Too often people think a bad scene, quote marks, bad scene, means someone failed. And like I understand why some people may feel like a lot of guilt and feel really shitty afterwards. And it's sad and it's a shame because stuff happens. It really does, and we can't help it. Things happen, but the healing part of it can take a while. It can take a good while, but as long as you attempt to heal and learn from it, and not you don't there is no like moving on. It happened, and you just have to you just have to learn from that experience and then mold the next experiences into something that can help heal that part of you. And it can be a very slow process. So do not also feel impatient that you're not healing fast enough.
Yeah, and I agree with you there, that healing is, that it's not a failure. And yeah, but I also think that sometimes we reach those deeper levels of trust by navigating difficult situations, with our BDSM partners, and it can be a very healing experience in itself to have someone react calmly, kindly, and constructively to you having a response based on previous trauma. And that can build trust in the relationship and also help you rebuild your trust in yourself.
Yeah. I've had sessions with bottoms where and subs where we've done something and they've cried because in other periods of their life they've been frowned upon for doing certain things in scenes or getting triggered. And there was a wonderful blissful moment where I was doing a certain thing on a sub and they just burst out crying because they just have never had it in that way where it's been so peaceful and loving in a way and tender and caring. And afterwards, there wasn't like any yelling or any guilt thrown onto them because they didn't feel comfortable in a certain scene. And I have seen that before where the submissives of the dominant have been held down to actually complete the scene, even though they're uncomfortable. And I actually saw it at an event recently, and I do not go to that event anymore. And it was the host who was actually doing it, and the host was actually intoxicated as well. Yeah, it was not great. And for me, that was just a massive red flag in general. And yeah, healing and trauma, it's not something that should be frowned upon. It's not something that should be yelled on. You shouldn't have the whole guilt of memories flowing back and now you're having to deal with your top or your dom making you feel bad.
Yeah, and that's what it was why I made a point of saying, as a top, you're going to feel distressed. You're going to feel like maybe you messed up. It sucks to have someone you care about suffering. But if you rely on them to help you integrate that, you're making them feel like a burden. You're making them feel, oh, I upset her so much and she's having to deal with this because of me. And then you end up prioritizing the other person's response to your emotions over your right to feel your emotions, which has like the ultimate long-term effect of you suppressing and bottling your emotions. That's the opposite of what we're going for in BDSM.
Absolutely. I feel like, especially if if you have a good connection with the bottom or even the top, to be fair, whoever's got the trauma,
all of us, baby.
Yeah, whoever has it, then you can maybe have a little discussion on like what can help heal it. So like something as like if the person with the trauma they want to be left alone, then they can be left alone. If you want to be a little bit cute about it potentially and be like, do you want like a hot chocolate or like a teddy.
Blanket.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Something just like they might not want you, they might want something else which like doesn't talk or isn't potentially like overbearing to them or isn't too much. And what I would say to that is don't take it personally. Do not. This is just one of the many coping methods which can come about when trauma comes. And sadly, we just can't really control that. And yeah, so we're gonna now explain into the ways rope can be intentionally used for healing. So you've worked with people who came to rope not just for erotic play, but for emotional grounding, somatic exploration, even grief processing. Can you talk more about some of the ways rope has been healing for others or for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it can be, I think most people, even if they've never done rope, can relate to that feeling where you've been having a really hard time, but you're keeping going and you're managing, and then someone just gives you a really kind word or a hug, and you just start to cry. And it's not that they've upset you, it's that they've given you the kindness and the space to sort of express what you're feeling. And rope can be a really powerful way of intentionally creating that space and consenting to be the safe vessel for someone's wild emotions that they feel like they're not allowed to express but have to get out. This is something that I've experienced on both sides of rope. I had a very difficult week before, and a friend tied me. We weren't doing anything super wild. She was just tying me with care, intention, and such focus and tenderness. And I just began to sob. And, she knew that that was what I needed. She knew that it was a release and not distress at anything she was doing. And she was so warm and accepting of my big emotional response. And I felt washed clean afterwards. It was wonderful. And I have had a friend come to me after experiencing a loss, and who was wanted to kind of start to reconnect to their sexual self, with a view to sort of stepping back into kink again, and wanted to have a tie with me where I would really hold the space for them emotionally. And we did that, and there was that moment, that sort of somatica moment where the emotions were released, and she began to cry, and I, as the top and not the person who'd experienced the loss, I started to cry too, because I was so moved by the trust and both like the empathic response and also like how honored I felt to be holding that space for her. And I think that rope can also be very healing for people in terms of body acceptance, whether that is disability related, particularly in the case of progressive conditions, or adapting to chronic illness, or changing, kind of what your body changes and what your body can do. And also in terms of gender. So, I've had experience with tying trans women who've sort of always wanted to be tied, but worried that they'd feel self-conscious about how the rope looked on them, or not, that it would make them feel dysphoric. And then had the experience of just feeling like beautiful and feminine, and feeling this congruence between how I'm treating them, how they look, and how they feel inside. And I found that really affirming experience. And I've been so buzzing to be able to give that to them.
It is really lovely, especially if somebody is looking in from like the vanilla side, so somebody who isn't into BDSM, or somebody who hasn't looked into BDSM, or is educated into BDSM. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is because BDSM is very, very beautiful in so many ways, and it's connected to our emotions, and it's connected to our brains, and there is a massive community as well, and it is really beautiful. It lets us express so much about each other, and yeah, I think I will, me personally, I will be forever grateful just for BDSM in general because it's led me on some amazing journeys and it's taught me so much about people in general, especially how their brains work. And I've met wonderful people doing this as well. So we're going to shift into something we talked about in part one. Which was body image. Because let's be honest, rope doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a world where sadly there is still very much it's shaped by fat phobia, ableism, and narrow beauty standards. For many people, being tied or even seen in rope means confronting body shame. And I know we just touched on it a little, but I'd like to go more in depth a little to talk about how do you work with people who are nervous about how their body will look, feel, or be judged in rope.
So negotiation is a part here. So, as I said, I tend to ask if anyone has, part of the body they'd rather not have touched or have tied. For example, if someone were transmasculine and had dysphoria about their chest, they might not want any rope there, or they might want rope, but only rope that was flattening and compressing rather than anything that was emphasizing contours. So partly negotiation. That's more in terms of the feel one. In terms of the sort of look and be judged one, I think as a rigger, just being appreciative and admiring, and often when people have a lot of shame, they can find it really hard to accept compliments. If someone feels self-conscious about their weight and someone said, your thighs look so beautiful in that tie, they might flinch or find that hard. But, if you look and just let your gaze linger and, trace your fingers along and you're not even saying it, but like you're watching and you're appreciating and they're saying you watch and appreciate. I think that something else that is important to do is make it really clear to someone that if something doesn't work, whether that's a particular tie, suspending someone in a particular position, trying to move their body in a certain way, if it doesn't work, that's your problem as a rigger. That's not their problem as a bottom. I always say to people, I like to move people around in rope and I have a fair bit of experience moving around people who are bigger than me, but everyone has different balance points, and slightly different techniques to kind of move people of different sizes and body compositions. And I want the bottom to be able to relax and experience, not to be stressing and second guessing, being, oh gosh, you should try to move me this way. Should I do that? Do I need to move that? So I say to people, if I'm trying to move you and it doesn't work, that's my problem. I'll figure out, better leverage or better angle. And if I can't figure it out, then I will ask you, I'll say, could you kneel, would you shift forward? Yeah. But yeah, so that they're not needing to feel self-conscious and apologetic about existing in their body, and they can feel confident that, yeah, my problem is to, figure the stuff out, and theirs is to relax, to enjoy, and to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication, lots and lots of communication, absolutely. So I think there's something incredibly beautiful and radical about putting somebody who is bigger or trans or disabled body in rope and saying, this body is worthy of adornment and attention. Because everybody is beautiful in so many different ways. It's a shame that I feel a lot of people don't feel that about themselves. And I understand it can be, for some people, a very hard hurdle to get over. But it's the same with trauma healing. The more you look, the more you do. Hopefully, potentially, the more confident you get with how you see yourself and that you are beautiful and you definitely are worthy of tying or being tied with rope. And rope doesn't erase the body, it highlights it. It draws attention to shape, posture, breath, and the silhouette. That thought will stay with me, and I'm sure with our listeners as well, that everybody is beautiful. Absolutely. I want to offer a question for everyone listening, whether they're rope curious, deeply experienced, or have never touched a coil of jute in their life. When someone gives you their body in rope, they're giving you access to something incredibly tender. It's a gift, not a guarantee. So, Miss Fay Morgan, what would you say to someone who wants to start tying but is afraid they're going to mess up?
A bottom or a rigger?
Both. Let's go
Okay.
with both.
Yeah. So I experienced, I think, probably more anxiety about messing up as a new rope bottom than as a new rigger. Of course, as a rigger, I had safety concerns and so on, but I was doing floor ties and staying away from risky things. But I remember having a conversation where I said, how can I be a good rope bottom? You know, I want to be good at this. I want to be a grade A student. I want to feel like I'm doing well. And the answer I got was, enjoy yourself. And I kind of snorted and went, that's not an answer. You know, no, tell me what it actually is. And basically the answer is just to show up authentically, you know, to try and not second guess, to be open to the person who is tying you, transporting you and taking you into that alternate world. As a rigger, you know, I would say technical skill, you know, be safe, but technical skill ain't all that. You know, you can just wrap a single rope around someone and just do it with like intent and presence, and it can be hot and it can be powerful. So I spoke in the last episode about learning to bring my energy and my personality into my rope, and part of that came with confidence in technical ability, but a lot of it was just self-confidence and me saying, well, you know, it might not be the most technically neat tie ever seen ever, you know, but, you know, I'm not taking pictures for the internet, or even if I am, you know, I am taking a picture to remember that moment. I'm not taking a picture at all. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, like the only thing that matters right now is me and this person and this space.
So we've covered the emotional core, the technical muscle, and the physiological terrain of shibari and rope play. We're going to talk more about what it means to keep rope in your life over years, not as a novelty or a trend, but as a practice, a part of who you are. And I feel like, Miss Fay, you've seen rope from many angles. You've been a part of quiet local jams and major rope festivals. You've taught, tied, learned, and held space. As in any other sphere in shibari, the voices and dynamics that are amplified are often those which already hold more power in our society. Often the image is of a male rigger tying a petite and serenely suffering feminine woman. So let's talk about gender in rope next. There's still so much bias in the kink world, conscious and unconsciousness. Consciousness?
Conscious and unconscious.
Conscious and unconscious, especially around who gets tied, who ties, who teaches, and who is taken seriously. So, have you noticed any patterns in how gender shows up in rope spaces? And how do you push back against those patterns in your own practice?
Have I noticed patterns? Yes, absolutely. As you said, there is an image. It is very prevalent, and it is one that is seen, you know, in online space, in rope, and in in-person ones. A frustrating thing I've seen is in-person ones, even, you know, at events or local scenes where there are many skilled female riggers, especially at general kink events. There's sometimes a limited amount of play space, either where rope is permitted or that is suitable for rope. You know, that there's enough space without you accidentally flicking someone on a spanking bench in the face with the end of your jute. Do not do that. Or if you're wishing to suspend, there's a suspension ring. And it can be really informative if you're at a party or event and you know that there are skilled female riggers there, And yet there's a, whether they be skilled or unskilled, a male rigger who sort of camps out and hogs the suspension point all night, or it's just a procession of men and none of the women sort of feel empowered and enabled to take up that space and to go, hey, actually, I would like to use the hard point now. So I think that's interesting. Even it's not just about ensuring that women and for, people who aren't so straight men have the opportunities to learn these skills. Is also about helping them to, be able to take that space unapologetically. And how do I push back against those patterns in my own practice? I'm a lot better at getting righteously angry on behalf of other people than on my own behalf. I am pretty good at, sticking up for my friends, and, I can be the person to say, hey, like I could have a word, or I could say, hey, that wasn't all right. Something else I've noticed in gender is I mentioned I self-suspend. And, as a, petite, conventionally attractive woman self-suspending, I've had men come up and try and chat to me or offer me advice mid-scene, or even go, oh, can I join in, or touch my rope? And I am just like, if a dude was tying me, you would not do this. I think if the dude were tying himself, you would not do that. It's just this assumption that like a female body is up for grabs. And if a woman is tying rope on herself, it's because she's advertising what a sexy bottom she is, not because she's having this kinky experience with herself. So I've got quite snippy. There was one indirect experience of that kind with someone who later went on to be a friend, in part because they responded well to this, where someone was having a rope scene near to where I was self-suspending and just becoming increasingly unaware of my space, coming into my space, risking hitting me with their rope because of their unconscious, entitlement of taking up a lot of space as a male rigger. I sort of managed to, while dangling, catch him and be like, hey, careful, you're in my space a bit. Can you just watch it? And he responded well to that, came up to me afterwards, apologized, and we became friends. So I suppose I push back on my own behalf when I feel able. I push back on my friend's behalf all the time. And when I teach and when I help with hosting events, I try to have some sort of system for the use of spaces that isn't just based on the loudest voices or those who feel most entitled to take up space.
I know. When you started talking about males and how it feels like, even when I do scenes, not out in public, but in the community, I feel like when it comes to cis women, it feels like for men, we have a fucking welcome sign on our heads where it's like, you can come up to us, absolutely, why not? And it's like, no.
The depressing thing is, I experienced that as a female rigger as well. While this is slightly different for me in that now, I do pro sessions, which means I am open to people I don't know approaching me with a specific request for a rope scene. But, that is something a communication and inquiry I'm consenting to receive. But it's been my experience at the past where I've been having, a really intense, lovely scene with a friend, an established play partner. And I've had some man I do not know come up and say, will you do me next? Will you tie me like that? And I'm going, no, I'm often in the middle of aftercare or rounding up a scene and tend to be quite snappy because, I'm in protect the bottom mode. But yeah, I'm out of words because it makes me cross.
No, I can agree with you as well, where I stick up for my friends more.
Yeah. And I get into very fierce mama bear mode when I am in that. I will always take on a position of, responsibility like that with my friends and look out for them. But especially when someone is bottoming to me, I am fierce and I will fiercely defend their space, in the scene, during aftercare, etc.
Yeah. So one thing I want to touch on, which ties into what we've just discussed about stereotypes and mainstream perceptions of this niche practice, is the pressure of visibility. In the age of Instagram and TikTok, rope has become incredibly visual. People post photos of their ties, their suspensions, their aesthetics, and that's beautiful. But it also changes how people relate to the practice. So, how do you feel that the social media ecosystem influences the relationship to rope, both for those within and those out with this community?
So it's a blessing and a curse. Like I'm someone who's normally quite, grumpy about social media. If it takes me sometimes several days to get back to the friends I want to talk to, I don't necessarily want to spend time posting into the void. But on the other hand, I do recognize the power it has in marginalized communities. So for me, I'm a member of the LGBT community, and, the online spaces are really important to be able to connect with others. And, in kink and then a niche sub practice within kink, when I started out, when I really got the shibari bug, I, made an Instagram for my rope work, and I connected with, in the majority of cases, friends of friends, because it's a small world across the UK. And it was lovely having sort of being mutuals already, because then it meant when I went to events, I could say, oh, hi. Yeah, no, we've messaged a bit, we've liked some of each other's pictures, and there was a bit of connection already. Or even if it was someone I'd had a more extended conversation with, if I knew I was going to be in their city, I could say, hey, do you want to get a coffee? Or even, would you like to tie together? So it was really nice for me in terms of feeling part of a community. But then the double-edged sword was I felt that there was this pressure to, keep putting things on the grid, keep putting up nice photos. And often the photos that give me the big warm fuzzies when I look back at them aren't the most aesthetically pleasing ones, because fun fact, a hobby of mine is analog photography. So I am actually really interested in photography as a visual medium. But when I am in top space in a scene, I'm not in photography brain. My focus is on the bottom, and I want to stay attuned to them, attuned to their body and their enthusiastic somatic consent, and not be focusing on image composition. So the pictures I take are out of focus and not great. But I look back and I remember the scene, I go, God, that was incredible. But if, that's the sort of thing that would get less engagement than a beautifully posed, beautifully lit picture, that of a suspension which could potentially be unsustainable. It could be that the model was, on a winch or a hoist, and sort of hoisted into that suspension for 2 minutes while photos were taken and then put down. And this can tie in with unrealistic expectations that people can have of their own bodies in rope or their own tying skills, of thinking, God, well, they do it and they make it look so beautiful. If someone's a professional shibari model, it is their job to make things look serene and beautiful. If you're not a ballet dancer, you can't, I'm returning to ballet again, you can't do incredible jumps and land on your toes and not get really hurt. So I have some resentment about it making about the photo not seen, but then on the other hand, I've made those connections, and also so many people have got into shibari through being drawn to the beautiful aesthetics, and then potentially have discovered they're more kinky than they knew. So yeah, mixed emotions. I'd say use social media as a tool, but don't let it use you as a tool.
Yeah, I think definitely don't let social media go to your head as well when it comes to seeing something that looks really perfect. And I know when photos are taken, it can look really perfect, but you don't know what is happening with the bottom, and you don't know what's happening with the top. I mean, there can be a really nice picture from the front, but from the back, their hands could be blue or something. Like,
yeah, or even on a less sinister level, like how they use pegs and clips on clothing mannequins and clothing stores to make the clothes look super fitted and tailored. If I do a tie, perhaps I'm developing a new harness with someone and it looks absolutely gorgeous from the front and the side, but I've not quite figured out a neat way to do the frictions at the back. I'll be like, hey, can you just twist your shoulders a bit so you can get a nice picture of the front of it? I'll figure out a better way to do that. But you're showing the good side of it.
Yeah,
and someone
yeah.
wouldn't know that actually now the rest of it's a bit messy.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are seeing like perfect ties and aesthetically, make sure that like you don't hold yourself up very, very high to the point where you really want to get to be able to make this aesthetic look really nice, because then you might get depressed. If you can't achieve what you're seeing online, it can be quite detrimental for the sake of whichever role you're in. So definitely take social media with a pinch of salt, I would say. It is beautiful, but it can be good, it can be bad. So now we're going to move on to some questions from our listeners. So the first question is, for someone listening who wants to learn rope but doesn't have a partner, where should they start? How do you recommend solo learners approach the practice?
I would say, I have a slightly different answer based on if the person is interested in cultivating self-tying as a practice, or if they're willing to tie themselves as a means to an end, but ultimately they want to be tying another person. So in my early days learning, where perhaps I knew some rope people, but they were experienced bottoms, and I felt that I wanted to respect their time and their expertise by learning what I could by myself. I tied furniture a lot. I would do half-hitch drills on the legs of my kitchen table. I would get a chair and try and approximately tie a box tie on it. I even got an old wetsuit of mine and I stuffed it with clothing so that then I could practice tying a strappado, which is the arms behind the back, elbows touching tie, so that way I could get the basic pattern down in my head and then get the most out of my time with the bottom, who was gifting me their time and their expertise as an experienced bottom, and I could use that time to really kind of nail down the finer details. So yeah, tie furniture, honestly. The second part of that would be go and find a partner. So, if that's, more of a long-term process, if it's the context of someone who wants to have a romantic monogamous relationship and practice rope with that partner, in that case, have fun, tie your chairs. If you're more looking to tie people within the kink community, then I'd say, get out there, start to make some connections, be that online, be that going to munches or local rope events, and just, leave your ego at the door and be friendly, admit that you're a beginner, and check out Shibari Study as well. It's really good.
Yeah. I would definitely say when you are going into the community and exploring, don't be like, I don't know, I would say don't be like too eager to find a bunny or a model.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say also be very open to tying people for practice, so, even if you are a straight man and you run into another straight man who's also wanting to learn to tie, you guys aren't attracted to each other. You're not going to form a BDSM relationship, but perhaps you could like hang out and just like take turns tying each other. And, then like you have a friend who'll nerd out with you and you can both get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point coming off of that, it's not gay. Like,
I'm informed it's not gay if you keep your socks on. It's not gay so long as there's no toe rope. and listeners, I always put toe rope in, so it's always gay with me.
But that is a narrative, maybe? Yeah, that I hear quite a bit with cis men especially, where it's like, oh, I like this, but I'm not gay. And it's like, chill. Yeah. Don't worry about that.
It's like
dude.
You'll play rugby and you'll like happily like have like sweaty tackles with your friends. And you don't see that as being threatening to your masculinity or your sexuality. So why would skill development in this thing? And if I were if I were seeking a rigger and I saw someone, practicing with his pal, like I would have a lot of respect, and I would I would be like, okay, so he's not just using rope as a tool to try and get women into bed. He wants to learn about this and he wants to develop skills. And he's also making friendships and connections and not just thinking about getting laid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the second question is, what if someone is terrified they'll do it wrong? That they'll hurt someone or tie the wrong knot or just look awkward? What do you say to people struggling with performance anxiety around rope?
I would say the only way out is through, the only way you can get rid of your fear is by doing the thing. And it can feel really hard to consistently start from zero and make yourself do the thing. So committing to regular practice. I said that I started seriously learning rope in 2018. I was going to events, I was going to classes, but I needed more practice time. So my New Year's resolution in 2019 was to do rope at least once every week. And I didn't have a established partner with whom I tied, but I had a pool of friends with varying levels of interest in, letting me practice tying them. And I sort of had them on a sort of rotating basis, and I would make sure that at least once a week I was doing rope. I would say in terms of worrying about hurting someone, that's a valid thing to be worried about. But if you are sensible and you are staying clear of a higher risk danger zones and you're listening to bottom, you're not playing while you're intoxicated or impaired or bottom is, then, that is manageable. If you're worried about tying the wrong knot, if you're not dangling someone off it, and it's not jabbing into a very sensitive part of their body in a non-consensual way. I mean, if it in a consensual way, that's fine. But don't worry about tying wrong knot. It doesn't matter. If you're worried about looking awkward and the bottom consents to it, blindfold them. That was a big help for me, when I was learning and I knew I'd pull my silly concentrating face. But if I blindfolded them, I could just be doing a sexy smirk. I'll let them think I'm doing a sexy smirk. I'll let them think I'm pausing to just increase tension rather than the anticipation, rather than because I can't remember the next bit. So just do the thing and it will probably be all right. Just be calm. It will get easier with time. And don't let fear hold you back from doing something you could really love.
Absolutely. I mean, going back to the blindfolding, it's good for sensory deprivation as well.
Absolutely.
And I do use it as well. If I'm not sure on what to do next as well, and there's a few pauses, I'm you're getting blindfolded.
Yeah. You don't deserve to look at me right now. You haven't earned that right.
Yeah. And then you can learn how to do it sexily or without the pause. And it can all just be a learning curve. So I want to finish on a more personal note. Yes, we are near the end of part 2.
At last.
Yeah, no, right? We've been going for so long. We've been doing rope. You've been doing rope, not me, for nearly a decade. How do you keep it alive for yourself? What keeps you curious, connected, and growing?
I think for me, and my ADHD brain, to an extent, I accept that my hobbies, my passions come in cycles. I know that rope is here to stay in my life, and there might be time periods where I'm more actively pursuing my learning and time periods where I'm just tying for fun occasionally or in combination with other kinks. I accept that. I don't stress out. I'm not on a race or a trajectory to acquire X level of skills by X date. So I try not to pressure myself in that way, but on the other hand, sometimes I forget how much I love it until I do it. It can feel like a lot of mental and physical energy to arrange, to commit to a time, to do the thing. And then 2 minutes in, I'm going, oh God, I love this. I should do this more. I should do this more. You can feel a little bit like exercise in that way sometimes. It makes you feel so good afterwards, but that activation energy can sometimes be hard. So for me, and this is a habit that I've made a commitment to get back into, is having weekly practice and what we call lab sessions, where you're trying out new ties or variations of ties with my regular rope partner as a weekly commitment. And how I keep it alive for myself, I think, like kink in general, there's just so much else you can explore. And if you're feeling burnt out or jaded on a particular side of it, you can go a different direction. In terms of how I keep it alive for myself, there's a combination here of remembering that, as in the rest of BDSM, there are so many different practices and so many different ways you can explore those practices. If you're feeling burnt out or jaded the way you're doing something, you don't need to force yourself. You can stop. You can take fresh. Approach it from a different direction. And in terms of what keeps me connected and growing, I think community is a really important answer here. Before the pandemic, I loved going to rope events and making connections, and I missed it so much when I couldn't. And that has been an utter delight to be able to do that. And now with my regular rope partner, who I can travel to events with and take workshops with, and just expose myself to different things and watch people tie and go, oh, I never thought of doing that in that way. And just feel that passion reignited over and over again.
So, Miss Fay, you've given us so much today, and in part 1 too as well.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about technique, vulnerability, philosophy, care. If listeners would like to see more of you, where can they follow?
So listeners can see more of me on X/Twitter. It's Miss_Fay, Fay _Morgan, Morgan. And on FetLife, it is Miss Fay Morgan, no spaces. And as I've mentioned, I do offer pro sessions, and I'm open to respectful inquiries on either of those platforms or via my email address, which can be found on those platforms.
Yeah, keyword respectful.
Yes. Yes.
So you've helped us understand that rope is never just rope. It's communication, it's calibration, it's curiosity, and it's commitment to yourself, to your partner, and to the practice. So thank you. We will link all your links in the show notes, and also link to the resources that you've recommended throughout the episode as well. Thank you very, very much for coming on. I've very much enjoyed your presence, and all the education you have brought is great.
Thank you for getting tangled up in it all with me. I very much appreciated it, and I've appreciated your curiosity and enthusiasm to learn more about practice.
Yeah, so remember, intimacy is not a performance, and rope is not a contest. It's a thread, and where it leads is up to you. Thank you so much for listening to Behind the Paddle Podcast with me and Miss Fay today. And yeah, we'll catch you on another episode. If you could give us a like on Spotify, Apple, whatever you're listening on, that would be great. It helps a lot. If there's any topics you would like to listen to or talk about, you can even come on the podcast. And yeah, you should be able to find all our details on the All My Links link. And yeah, this has been Behind the Paddle Podcast with me, Paulson Victoria. Thank you very much, and goodbye.